I never intended to walk into my father's estate meeting with a man wearing a coat that smelled of rain and old gasoline. I expected my sister Vanessa to sneer at his ragged clothes or call security. Instead, when he stepped into the fluorescent light of the law office, she went dead silent. She didn't see a beggar. She saw a ghost. And for the first time in 33 years, I saw my perfect sister absolutely terrified. The drive back to Briarhaven felt less like a homecoming and more like a slow descent into deep water. The town hadn't changed since I left 5 years ago. It was still a gray, imposing collection of slate roofs and brick facades clinging to the edge of the Atlantic. Perpetually damp with salt spray and old money, my father, Grant Coleman, had owned half the real estate in this county and held mortgages on the other half. Now that he was in the ground, the air in town felt heavier, as if the gravity of his influence had collapsed in on itself, leaving a vacuum that everyone was waiting to see filled. I parked my rental car 2 blocks from the county courthouse, needing the walk to steel my nerves. The meter asked for 4 quarters, and I fumbled with my purse, my hands shaking just enough to annoy me. I was 33 years old. I had a life in Chicago. I had a job, an apartment, and friends who didn't know the suffocating weight of the name Coleman. Yet the moment my tires hit the Briarhaven city limits, I reverted to being the little sister, the messy one, the one who ran away while Vanessa stayed and polished the silver. The wind off the harbor was biting, cutting through my coat as I walked toward the offices of Wexler and Shore. The legal group had handled my father's affairs for 40 years, and today was the reading of the will. It was supposed to be a formality. Vanessa had likely orchestrated every beat of this meeting weeks ago, probably while our father was still drawing shallow breaths in the hospice wing. I clutched the condolence card I had received from an old high school teacher in my hand, using it as a sort of talisman. It was crinkled now, bent at the corners from my nervous grip. That was when I saw him. He was sitting on the low stone wall bordering the courthouse steps, a man who looked like he had been eroded by the same wind that was currently stinging my face. His coat was a patchwork of heavy wool, stained with oil and mud, and his boots were held together with silver duct tape. He wasn't begging, though. That was the first thing that struck me. Most people in his position, the invisible drift of Briarhaven, would have a cup out, or a sign, or at least a posture of solicitation. This man was just watching. He sat with a straight spine, his eyes darting between the faces of the lawyers and clerks rushing in and out of the heavy oak doors. He was scanning them. It reminded me of a bouncer counting heads, or perhaps a fire marshal checking for exits. It was sharp, deliberate, and entirely out of place for a man with dirt etched into the creases of his forehead. I tightened my grip on my purse and aimed my eyes forward, executing the maneuver I had been taught since birth. The Coleman ignore. You do not engage. You do not stare. You walk with purpose, and the world parts for you. But as I passed him, his head snapped toward me. He didn't look at my face. He looked at the envelope in my hand. Coleman, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, flat and low, like a stone dropped into a well. I faltered, my heels clicking to a halt on the pavement. I turned to look at him. His face was hidden beneath a gray beard and layers of grime, but his eyes were startlingly clear, a piercing, intelligent blue that seemed to strip away the expensive fabric of my coat. "I beg your pardon?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He nodded at the card in my hand. "You are a Coleman, Grant's daughter." "I am," I said, defensive now. "Do I know you?" He let out a short, dry sound that might have been a laugh. "No, you don't know me. But you have his chin. And you walk like you are apologizing for taking up space. Grant never did that." I stiffened. My father had been a force of nature, a man who consumed all the oxygen in a room. I had spent my entire life trying to shrink so I wouldn't be crushed by him. Hearing a stranger articulate that insecurity on a public street felt like a slap. "I have to go," I said, turning away. I took 3 steps toward the law office doors before the guilt hooked me. It was a physical sensation, a tug in my chest. I hated Briarhaven because it was cold and cruel. Because it was a place where image mattered more than humanity. If I walked away from a man shivering in 40-degree weather just because he made me uncomfortable, I was no better than Vanessa. I was no better than my father. I cursed under my breath and doubled back. Across the street, there was a deli. I walked over, leaving the man watching me, and bought a turkey sandwich and a large black coffee. When I returned, he hadn't moved. He was still scanning the crowd, his eyes narrowing as a paralegal in a gray suit hurried past. "Here," I said, holding out the bag and the cup. "It is cold." He looked at the food, then up at me. He didn't snatch it. He took it slowly, his fingers brushing against my glove. They were rough, calloused, and freezing. "Thank you," he said. His voice was educated. That was the second thing that threw me. He didn't sound like the locals. He sounded like the inside of a library. I lingered, unsure why I wasn't leaving. "I am Gabriella," I said. "Damon," he replied. He took a sip of the coffee, closing his eyes as the steam hit his face. "Damon Rowe." "Well, Damon, I hope this helps." I turned to leave again, but his voice stopped me. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that froze my feet to the sidewalk. "Did your father ever tell you who actually built the first Coleman account?" I spun around. The question was absurd. My father had built the Coleman empire. He was the genius, the titan, the man who turned a small loan into a portfolio of properties that spanned 3 states. That was the gospel according to Grant Coleman. "My father built this family," I said, my tone icy. Damon took a bite of the sandwich, chewing slowly, unbothered by my anger. He swallowed and looked at the courthouse doors. Grant was good at closing deals. He was good at shaking hands and drinking scotch. But the architecture? The contracts? The structural loopholes that let him leverage assets he didn't technically own yet? He looked at me. And for a second, the beggar vanished. In his place was someone terrifyingly competent. Grant couldn't do math without a calculator. "Gabriella, he didn't build the engine. He just painted the car." "You are lying," I said, though my heart had started to hammer against my ribs. "You are looking for money. I gave you food. Don't push it." Damon reached into the deep pocket of his coat. I flinched, expecting a weapon, but he pulled out a crumpled yellow slip of paper. He smoothed it out against his knee. It was a receipt. He held it out to me. I shouldn't have taken it. I should have walked into the law office and let the security guard handle him. But the way he held it, between 2 fingers, precise and steady, compelled me. I took the paper. It was a receipt for a storage facility called Seabright Storage, Unit 402. It was paid through the end of the month. "If you want to know why your sister hates you," Damon said quietly, "start there." "Why would my sister hate me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She is my sister. We have our differences. But she doesn't hate you because you are different." Damon interrupted. He stood up then, and he was taller than I expected. He loomed over me, blocking the wind. "She hates you because you are the only one left who might figure it out. And she is terrified of what happens when you do." "Figure what out?" Damon just smiled, a sad, broken expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Go to the meeting, Gabriella. Watch her hands. Watch her eyes when she talks about the legacy. Then ask yourself if she looks like a woman who is grieving, or a woman who is hiding the body." He sat back down and turned his attention to his coffee, dismissing me as effectively as if he were a CEO dismissing a junior associate. I stood there for a long moment, the receipt burning a hole in my palm. The wind howled around the corner of the building, carrying the smell of rain. I shoved the paper into my pocket and turned toward the heavy doors of Wexler and Shore, my heart rhythm completely out of sync with the somber occasion. Inside, the law office was a sanctuary of hushed tones and expensive carpet. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that kept everyone awake but not comfortable. I gave my name to the receptionist, a young woman who looked at me with that specific small-town pity, the kind that says, "I know everything about your tragedy, and I am dying to tell my friends about your shoes." "Ms. Coleman," she whispered. "Mr. Wexler is out today, but Ms. Klein is expecting you in the main conference room. I nodded and walked down the hallway. The walls were lined with portraits of old men in judges' robes, their eyes following me with judgment. I found the conference room at the end of the hall. Mara Klein was already there, organizing a stack of files that looked thick enough to stop a bullet. Mara was in her late 40s, a sharp, nervous woman who had been a junior partner when I was a teenager. She looked up as I entered, and I saw a flash of relief wash over her face, followed instantly by a return to professional neutrality. "Gabriella," she said, coming around the table to shake my hand. Her grip was damp. "I am so sorry for your loss." "Thank you." "Mara," I said, taking a seat at the long mahogany table. It felt too big for just 3 people. Mara sat back down, adjusting her glasses. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She kept shuffling papers, moving a pen from one side of her notebook to the other. The atmosphere in the room was brittle. It felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a bomb squad trying to defuse a device. "Is everything all right?" I asked. "You seem tense." Mara offered a tight, plastic smile. "It is just a busy day." Estates are always complicated, Gabriella, especially with a portfolio as diverse as your father's. We want to make sure everything is perfect. "Perfect," I repeated. That was the Coleman watchword. The door opened behind me, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vanessa breezed in. My sister was 3 years older than me, and she had spent every one of those years perfecting the art of being untouchable. She was wearing a black dress that cost more than my car, tailored to within an inch of its life. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, sleek bun, not a single strand out of place. She looked beautiful, formidable, and utterly cold. "Gabriella," she said, her voice smooth like polished glass. She walked over to me. I stood up, bracing myself. She leaned in and hugged me. It was a performance hug, shoulders only, no chest contact, 2 quick pats on the back. She smelled of expensive vanilla and hairspray. "You look tired," she whispered in my ear. I pulled back, forcing a smile. It was a long drive. "Ness," she scanned me, her eyes flicking over my off-the-rack coat and my wind-blown hair. She reached out and tucked a stray lock behind my ear, a gesture that felt more like a correction than affection. "We are going to get through this," she said, addressing the room but looking at me. "Dad's legacy deserves dignity. We need to be strong. No scenes today. Gabriella, please." The implication was clear. I was the liability. I was the emotional weak link who might cry or shout or ask inconvenient questions. She was the steady hand. I felt a flash of anger, hot and sudden. I thought of the man outside. Grant didn't build the engine. He just painted the car. I looked at Vanessa. She was already sitting down, opening her leather portfolio, uncapping a gold fountain pen. She looked so sure of herself, so in control. I touched the crumpled receipt in my pocket. "Actually," I said, remaining standing. Vanessa stopped, her pen hovering over her notepad. She looked up, her eyebrows pulling together in a microscopic expression of annoyance. "Actually what?" "I met a friend of Dad's outside." I said. Vanessa let out a short, dismissive breath. "Dad didn't have friends waiting on the sidewalk." "Gabriella, sit down." He seemed to know a lot about the company. I pressed. "He is waiting in the cold. I think we should invite him in." Mara Klein looked between us, her eyes wide. "Gabriella, this is a private family meeting." "I know," I said, "but he said he worked with Dad. In the beginning, I think it would be respectful to offer him a chair in the lobby at least. It is freezing out there." Vanessa stared at me. Her eyes were hard. "You are being ridiculous. This is exactly what I meant about scenes. Who is this person?" "I don't know." I lied. "Just a man." But he recognized the name. I turned before she could stop me and walked out of the conference room. "Gabriella," Vanessa hissed, her chair scraping against the floor as she stood up. I ignored her. I walked straight out to the front doors. My heart was pounding in my throat. I didn't know why I was doing this. Part of it was spite. the desire to crack Vanessa's perfect porcelain surface. Part of it was the haunting conviction in Damon's voice when he talked about the storage unit. I pushed open the front doors. Damon was still there, sitting on the wall. He looked up. "Come inside," I said. He looked at me, tilting his head. "You are making a mistake. Gabriella." "Probably," I said. "But I bought you a sandwich. Now I am offering you a chair. Are you coming?" He hesitated, then slid off the wall. He adjusted his coat, buttoning it to the neck to hide the worst of the grime. He ran a hand through his gray hair, smoothing it back. For a second, his posture shifted again. He didn't walk like a beggar. He walked like a man entering a boardroom he used to own. I led him back through the reception area. The receptionist's jaw dropped, but she didn't say a word. I led him down the hall. I could hear Vanessa's voice from the conference room, sharp and agitated, totally unstable. "Mara, I told you. She has always been like this. We need to get this done before she turns it into a circus." I stepped into the doorway. Damon stepped in beside me. I brought him in out of the cold. I announced, "He can wait in the lobby." "But I wanted you to see—" Vanessa was standing at the head of the table, her hand raised as if she were giving a speech. She turned to look at us, her mouth already forming a reprimand. Then she saw him. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't the silence of a pause. It was the silence of a car crash. The moment after the metal stopped screeching, Vanessa went rigid. Her face, usually a mask of perfectly applied foundation and blush, drained of color so fast it looked like the blood had been siphoned out of her. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Her eyes went wide, fixed on Damon's face. Mara Klein looked from Vanessa to Damon and back again. She sensed the shift immediately. She stopped sorting papers and froze, her hands hovering over the table. Damon didn't say a word. He just stood there, framed by the doorway, his hands in his pockets. He looked at Vanessa with a calm, terrifying familiarity. "Vanessa?" I said. She blinked, a jerky, mechanical motion. Her hand, the one holding the gold pen, started to shake. It wasn't a tremble. It was a violent vibration. She gripped the edge of the mahogany table to steady herself, her knuckles turning white. "Get him out," she whispered. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was thin, high, and laced with panic. "Excuse me?" I said. "Get him out!" she screamed, the sound tearing through the professional quiet of the office. She pointed a shaking finger at Damon. "Security! Mara, call security!" "Vanessa, stop!" I said, stepping forward. He is not supposed to be here." Vanessa yelled, backing away until she hit the window behind her. She looked like she was trapped in a cage with a tiger. Damon finally spoke. His voice was soft, barely more than a murmur, but it carried across the room. "Hello, Vanessa. It has been a long time." Vanessa made a sound like she was choking. She dropped her folder. Papers spilled across the floor, sliding over the expensive carpet. She didn't look at them. She couldn't take her eyes off him. I looked at my sister, the woman who never flinched, never faltered, never showed weakness. She was trembling so hard her teeth were almost chattering. Then I looked at Damon. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked tired, but he didn't look afraid. "Who are you?" I asked him, my voice barely audible in the ringing silence. Vanessa answered before he could. She straightened up, forcing a jagged, desperate smile onto her face. It was the most grotesque expression I had ever seen her make. "He is nobody," she said, her voice cracking. She looked at Mara, then at me, her eyes darting wildly. "He is just a random drifter. Gabriella found a drifter." She laughed, a high, manic sound. "Just a drifter, right?" she said, looking at Damon with a plea so naked it made my stomach turn. Damon held her gaze for a long, excruciating second. Then he looked at me. I realized then that the receipt in my pocket wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a weapon. And whatever war had just started in this room, Vanessa had already lost the first battle because she had flinched. "I am just a drifter," Damon said, his voice flat. But as he turned to walk back toward the lobby, I saw Vanessa's knees buckle. She sank into the leather chair, burying her face in her hands, and for the first time in my life, I realized that the monster in the closet wasn't my father. It was the secret my sister was keeping. The silence in the conference room after Damon left was not peaceful. It was heavy and suffocating, like the air before a thunderstorm breaks. Vanessa sat in her high-backed leather chair, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was too fast to be calm, but too controlled to be panic. She was smoothing the front of her dress repeatedly, her manicured fingers ironing out invisible wrinkles on the fabric. It was a nervous tic I had not seen since we were teenagers. Back when our mother left and Vanessa had tried to scrub the stain of abandonment out of the carpets, Mara Klein cleared her throat. It was a small, dry sound that seemed to crack the tension. She looked at Vanessa, then at me, her eyes darting behind her rimless glasses. "Shall we proceed?" Mara asked, her voice trembling slightly. Vanessa nodded. A sharp, jerky movement. "Yes, read it. Let us get this over with." I sat down slowly, my hands clenched in my lap. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, an echo of the adrenaline from the hallway. I could still see the look on Vanessa's face when she saw Damon. The sheer, unadulterated terror. It didn't make sense. Vanessa was the queen of Briarhaven. She was the woman who had stared down union leaders and hostile takeover attempts without blinking. What could a homeless man possibly have on her? Mara opened the heavy binder in front of her. The sound of the paper turning was loud in the quiet room. "I will skip the preamble," Mara said, looking down at the document. "This is the last will and testament of Grant Thomas Coleman, dated October 4th, 2021. I thought, 5 years ago, right after I left for Chicago." Mara began to read. The language was dense, a thicket of legal terminology designed to obscure the simple truth of money and power. I listened, trying to pick out the words that mattered, but the drone of her voice made it difficult. It wasn't until she reached the section on the disposition of assets that the fog cleared. "To my daughter, Vanessa Coleman," Mara read, her voice gaining a little strength. "I bequeath the entirety of my voting shares in Coleman Meridian Holdings, along with the title to the family estate at Briarhaven and all associated real property. Vanessa shall be named the sole interim executor of the estate, with full authority to manage, sell, or leverage assets as she deems necessary for the preservation of the family legacy." I stared at the table. I had expected Vanessa to get the house. She had lived there. After all, she had taken care of him. But the voting shares? The control of the company? That was everything. Coleman Meridian wasn't just a business. It was the engine that ran the entire town. "And to my daughter, Gabriella Coleman," Mara continued, her voice dropping a decibel. "I bequeath a structured distribution from the Coleman Family Trust." She paused. I looked up. "Go on," Vanessa said, her voice hard. "Read the conditions." Mara hesitated, licking her lips. "The distribution is to be paid out in monthly installments, capped at $4,000 per month, subject to an annual review by the trustee." "Who is the trustee?" I asked. Mara didn't look at me. "Vanessa is the trustee." I felt a cold flush of humiliation creep up my neck. $4,000 a month. It was an allowance. It was the kind of money you gave a college student so they wouldn't starve. Not a bequest to a 33-year-old woman with a career. But it wasn't the amount that stung. It was the control. "There are conditions," Mara added softly. "Of course there are," I said. "The beneficiary must maintain a lifestyle consistent with the moral standing of the Coleman family." Mara read, rushing through the words now. "Any evidence of substance abuse, financial insolvency, or behavior deemed detrimental to the reputation of the estate will result in the immediate suspension of payments. The determination of such behavior is at the sole discretion of the trustee." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was a short, bitter bark of a laugh that made Mara jump. "So," I said, looking at Vanessa, "you own everything, and I get an allowance, provided I am a good girl and don't embarrass you." Is that it? Vanessa finally looked at me. Her face had regained some of its color, and her expression had settled back into that familiar, pitying mask. It is for your own good. Gabriella, she said, Dad knew you struggled with stability. You left, remember? You ran away to the city and took a job that barely pays rent. You have never shown an interest in the responsibilities of this family. Dad wanted to make sure you were taken care of, without burdening you with decisions you aren't equipped to make. Equipped? I repeated. I am a marketing director. Vanessa, I manage a budget of $2 million. I am not a child. You are emotional. Vanessa countered smoothly. Look at today. You brought a beggar into our father's estate meeting. You create chaos. Gabriella, you always have. Dad knew that. He was protecting the company from your impulses. The narrative was closing in on me, heavy and suffocating. It was the same story they had told since I was 16. Gabriella is the wild one. Gabriella is the mess. Vanessa is the rock. It didn't matter what I achieved or how hard I worked. In this room, within the gravity of Briarhaven, I was just the screw-up sister. I looked down at my hands, feeling the familiar urge to just agree, to sign the papers and leave, to get back to Chicago where I was a real person. That was when I felt it. In my right pocket, my fingers brushed against a piece of paper, not the receipt Damon had given me earlier. That was in my left pocket. This was different, a small, folded square of rough notebook paper. My mind raced. When? Then I remembered, in the doorway, when Vanessa had started screaming and I had stepped between them. Damon had brushed past me as he turned to leave, his hand grazing my coat. He must have slipped it in then, a sleight of hand so smooth I hadn't even registered it. I glanced at Vanessa. She was watching Mara, checking the page number on the will. I slid my hand into my pocket and unfolded the paper blindly, keeping it hidden under the table. I glanced down. The handwriting was jagged, scrawled in pencil, but legible. Ask about the codicil dated March 14th. My stomach dropped. March 14th. That was only 6 months ago. Dad died 3 weeks ago. If there was a codicil from March, it would supersede the will from 2021. But I had never mentioned dates to Damon. I hadn't told him when Dad died, or when the will was written. How could he possibly know about a specific date unless he knew the internal workings of my father's legal affairs? I looked at the paper again. Just 6 words. A command. I looked at Vanessa. She was looking at her watch, clearly eager to wrap this up. Is that everything? Vanessa asked Mara. The main provisions? Yes. Mara said, there are some minor bequests to the staff, but... Wait, I said. Vanessa sighed. A loud, theatrical exhale. What now? Gabriella? I took a breath. I felt like I was standing on a cliff edge. If I asked this, there was no going back to the quiet, resentful peace we had maintained for years. If I asked this, I was declaring war. I thought of Damon's eyes. Grant didn't build the engine. He just painted the car. Is there anything else? I asked, looking directly at Mara. Mara frowned. I just said, there are minor bequests. No, I said, recent changes, modifications. Mara looked confused. No, Gabriella, this is the final will. Are you sure? I pressed. What about the codicil? The room went dead silent again. This time, it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of a trap snapping shut. Mara froze. Her eyes flicked to Vanessa, then back to me. It was a micro-reaction, barely a second long, but it was there. She knew what I was talking about. Vanessa stiffened. Her spine became a rod of steel. What are you talking about? Vanessa asked, her voice ice cold. The codicil, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. Dated March 14th. Mara dropped her pen. It clattered against the mahogany table, sounding like a gunshot. She scrambled to pick it up, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. Mara stammered. Where did you hear that date? So it exists, I said. Mara looked at Vanessa. Panicked. It was a draft, a discussion. It was never, it is not valid. Vanessa cut in, her voice sharp and loud. She slammed her hand down on the table. That document was never executed. Dad was not in his right mind in March. He was on medication. He was confused. We discussed it, and he discarded it. Mara looked down at her files, her hands shaking. Technically, strictly speaking, it was signed. But there are questions regarding competency. It is subject to verification. We were not planning to present it today because its validity is being contested. Contested by who? I asked. By me, Vanessa snapped. I am the executor. It is my duty to ensure that only valid documents are honored. Dad was being manipulated in his final months. People were trying to take advantage of him. That codicil, what does it say? I interrupted. It doesn't matter what it says, Vanessa shouted. She stood up, her chair flying back. It is a fraud. It is a piece of garbage written by a senile old man who didn't know who he was talking to. I stared at her. My sister never shouted. She never lost control. Twice in 1 hour. She had unraveled. If it is garbage, I said quietly, then why are you so afraid of it? Vanessa stared at me, her chest heaving. For a moment, I thought she was going to come across the table and hit me. The hatred in her eyes was so raw, so undisguised, that I actually recoiled. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the mask slammed back into place. She took a deep breath, smoothed her hair, and pulled her dignity around her like a cloak. I am not afraid, Gabriella, she said, her voice dropping to a chilly calm. I am protective. I am protecting this family from vultures, and right now, you are sounding suspiciously like one of them. She turned to Mara. We are done for today. My sister is clearly upset and confused. We will reconvene when she has had time to process the reality of the situation. Mara nodded rapidly, closing the binder. Yes, of course, we can reschedule. I didn't move. I sat there, looking at the two of them, the lawyer who was too scared to do her job, and the sister who was running the show. I want a copy, I said, of the codicil. Mara looked at Vanessa. Vanessa gave a microscopic shake of her head. I will have to check the protocol on releasing disputed documents. Mara lied. I will get back to you. Gabriella. I stood up. Do that, I said. I didn't wait for a dismissal. I turned and walked out of the conference room, my legs feeling like jelly. I made it to the elevator, pressed the button, and leaned my forehead against the cool metal of the doors. March 14th. Damon knew. He knew the date, and he knew it mattered. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped in. As the doors were sliding shut, a hand thrust between them, forcing them back open. It was Vanessa. She stepped into the elevator with me. The doors closed, sealing us in the small, mirrored box. She didn't look at me at first. She watched the numbers light up as we descended. 1, 2, you need to be careful. Gabriella, she said softly. I looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was composed now, perfect and serene. Careful of what? I asked. Of who you listen to, she said. She turned to face me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a convincing, watery concern. I know you are hurting. I know coming back here is hard. You feel left out. You feel like Dad didn't trust you. Don't do that. I said, don't psychoanalyze me. I am your sister, she said, reaching out to touch my arm. I flinched, but she held on. I love you. I want you to be part of this family. You can still have a relationship with us. You can still come to the house for Christmas. We can make this work. But you have to stop listening to street people. Street people? I asked. You mean Damon? She squeezed my arm. Her grip was tight, bordering on painful. That man is dangerous. Gabriella. He is a grifter. He preys on grief. He probably looked up Dad's obituary, found your name, and made up a story to get money out of you. He didn't ask for money. I said, they never do at first. Vanessa said, it is called the long con. He plants a seed of doubt. He makes you think there is some big secret, and then, once you are hooked, he bleeds you dry. Please, for your own safety, stay away from him. It sounded so reasonable. If I hadn't seen her face in the conference room, If I hadn't seen the sheer, primal terror when she looked at him, I might have believed her. Vanessa was a master at wrapping threats in the language of love, but I had seen her face. I pulled my arm away. I am 33, Vanessa, I said. I can choose my own friends. The elevator chimed at the lobby level. The doors opened. Vanessa's face hardened. The concern evaporated, leaving only the cold, hard rock beneath. Fine, she said, but if you choose him, don't expect me to save you when you drown. I walked out of the elevator without looking back. I found him 20 minutes later. I had driven my rental car around the block 3 times, checking the mirrors to see if anyone was following me. It felt paranoid, ridiculous, like something out of a bad movie, but after the way Mara had looked at me, and the way Vanessa had squeezed my arm, paranoia felt like a survival instinct. He was waiting behind a coffee shop called The Daily Grind, standing near the dumpsters in the alleyway. It was a bleak spot, shielded from the main street by a high brick wall. I pulled the car up next to him and rolled down the window. "You have a nice family," Damon said. He was leaning against the brick wall, smoking a cigarette that looked like it had been rolled by hand. "Get in," I said. He dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his boot. He opened the passenger door and slid in. The smell of him filled the car instantly. Rain, old tobacco, and the metallic tang of unwashed clothes. I tried not to wrinkle my nose. "Did you ask?" he asked, buckling his seatbelt with surprising automaticity. "I did," I said, putting the car in gear. Mara almost swallowed her tongue. Vanessa said it was invalid. She said Dad was senile. Damon let out a short, dark laugh. Grant was a lot of things. Senile wasn't one of them. He was sharp as a tack until the morphine took him. He looked at me. "You believe me now?" "I don't know what I believe," I said, merging onto the coastal road. "I think you know things you shouldn't. I think my sister is terrified of you, and I think I am the only one who doesn't know what the hell is going on." "That is accurate," Damon said. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Seabright Storage," he said. "It is on the north side of town, out past the cannery. I know where it is," I said. We drove in silence for a few miles. The ocean was on our right, a churning expanse of gray water. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth. Counting time. "Why me?" I asked finally. "Why not go to the police? Or the press? If you know so much." Damon stared out the window. "I tried the police. Once. A long time ago. Vanessa has friends in the precinct. The chief of police plays golf at the club on Sundays. As for the press, who are they going to believe? The heiress in the Chanel suit? Or the guy sleeping under the pier?" He turned to look at me. His eyes were intense. "I need you, Gabriella. Because you are the only Coleman who isn't dirty, and because you have legal standing. They can't arrest you for asking questions about your own father." "That is debatable," I muttered, thinking of the behavioral conditions in the will. We pulled up to the storage facility. It was a rundown place, a maze of orange metal doors surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A sign in the window of the front office flashed, "Open" in neon red. I parked the car. "I don't have a key," I said. Damon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass key. It looked old. "I have had this for 12 years, he said. We got out of the car. The wind was whipping around the metal buildings, making them rattle. We walked into the front office. The manager was a heavy-set man with a thick mustache, reading a car magazine behind the counter. He looked up as the door chime rang. "Help you folks?" he asked. Then he saw Damon. The man's eyes widened. He froze, his hand halfway to his coffee mug. It was the same reaction Mara had. Recognition, followed by immediate, panicked denial. He looked down at his magazine quickly. "I need to access Unit 402, Damon said. His voice was firm. The manager didn't look up. "Name on the account?" "You know the name. Earl," Damon said. The manager's head snapped up. His face was pale. "Look, buddy, I don't want any trouble. The rent is paid. That is all I know. If you have the key, go ahead. Just don't bring me into this." I saw the look pass between them. It was a look of shared history, of secrets kept. Earl wasn't just a clerk. He was a gatekeeper. Damon nodded. Thanks. Earl, we walked out back, into the maze of units. He recognized you. I said. Damon didn't answer. He was walking fast, counting the numbers on the doors. 398, 400. Here, he said. He stopped in front of Unit 402. The door was rusted at the bottom. He handed me the key. You do it, he said. Why? Because of the chain of custody, he said. He sounded like a lawyer again. If I open it, Vanessa can claim I planted whatever is inside. If you open it, if you break the seal, then it is your discovery. You are the beneficiary. It is your property. I looked at the key in my hand. It felt heavy. I am scared. Damon, I whispered. I realized it was the first time I had used his name without sarcasm. Good, he said. You should be. I inserted the key into the padlock. It was stiff, but it turned with a loud click. I pulled the lock off and slid the latch back. The metal door groaned as I rolled it up. Dust motes danced in the gray light. The unit was small, maybe 5 by 5 feet. It smelled of old paper and mildew. It wasn't full of furniture or boxes like a normal storage unit. There were only 3 things in the center of the concrete floor, sitting on a wooden pallet to keep them off the damp ground: a gray metal file cabinet, a battered leather portfolio, and a framed photograph. I walked in. The photograph was leaning against the cabinet. I picked it up. It was an old picture, taken maybe 20 years ago. It showed my father, Grant Coleman, standing on the deck of a boat. He was laughing, holding a champagne glass. He looked younger, vibrant, full of that terrifying energy I remembered. Standing next to him, with an arm draped over Dad's shoulder, was another man. He was tall, wearing a suit that looked expensive even in the grainy photo, but I couldn't see his face. Someone had taken a sharp object, a knife, or a key, and scratched the face out. It wasn't just a scratch. It was an obliteration. The paper was torn where the face should have been, leaving a jagged white hole. I looked at Damon. He was standing outside the unit, watching me. Is this you? I asked, holding up the photo. Damon nodded. That was taken the day we signed the incorporation papers for Coleman Meridian. Why is your face scratched out? Because your father couldn't bear to look at me, he said, but he couldn't bear to throw the photo away, either. Guilt is a funny thing. Gabriella, it eats you from the inside out. I put the photo down. I looked at the file cabinet. It was locked. Open it, Damon said. I tried the drawers. Locked. Break it, he said. There is a crowbar in the corner. I looked in the corner. Sure enough, a rusty tire iron was leaning against the wall. I picked it up. It felt foreign in my hands. I was a marketing director. I didn't break into file cabinets. Do it, Damon urged. I jammed the flat end of the tire iron into the gap above the top drawer. I leveraged my weight against it. Metal screeched against metal. I pushed harder, gritting my teeth. With a loud pop, the lock mechanism snapped. I pulled the drawer open. It was packed tight with hanging folders. But right on top, sitting on the files like a crown jewel, was a thick envelope. I picked it up. It wasn't sealed. I pulled out the papers inside. It was a letter. The stationery was yellowed, but the letterhead was unmistakable. From the desk of Grant Coleman, I read the first line, to my daughter. Gabriella, if you are reading this, I have failed to fix the mistake I made 30 years ago. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the wind outside. Read the second paragraph, Damon said from the doorway. I skipped down. There are things about this company, and about your sister, that you do not know. The fortune you grew up with was not built on my genius. It was built on the row arrangement, and it is vital that Vanessa never controls the evidence contained in this cabinet. I looked up at Damon. The row arrangement? I asked. Damon stepped into the unit. He looked at the files. My name isn't Rowe, Gabriella, he said softly. Rowe was my mother's maiden name. I used it to hide, to survive. He reached out and touched the scratched-out face in the photo. My name is Damon Pierce. I was the Chief Operations Counsel for Coleman Meridian, and I didn't just work for your father. I was his partner. Until he let your sister destroy me. I looked at the documents in my hand. The name Damon Pierce was referenced in the next paragraph. The assets legally belonging to Damon Pierce must be restored. My world tilted. The narrative I had lived with my entire life, the story of Grant Coleman, the self-made titan, was dissolving in my hands. Why? I asked. Why did Vanessa do it? Damon looked at me. His blue eyes were hard as flint. Because I found out what she did during the liquidity crisis of '98. He said, and she knew that if I stayed, she would go to prison, so she made sure I was the one who took the fall. He pointed to the cabinet. Everything is in there. Gabriella. The ledgers, the minutes, the proof. He paused. And now that you have opened it, you are the only thing standing between her and the end of the Coleman empire. I looked at the cabinet, then at the letter, then at the photo with the scratched-out face. I thought of Vanessa's face in the elevator. The cold, hard warning. Don't expect me to save you when you drown. I wasn't drowning. I realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity that I was finally learning how to swim. We need to move this, I said. Damon blinked. What? We need to move it, I repeated. Vanessa knows you are here. The manager knows you are here. She will be coming. If this stays here, she will burn it. I looked at him. Help me carry it to the car. Damon stared at me for a second, and then, for the first time, a real smile touched his lips. Yes, ma'am, he said. We grabbed the handles of the file cabinet and heaved. It was heavy, burdened with 30 years of secrets, but we lifted it together. The file cabinet sat in the center of the motel room like a monolith. We had dragged it up the exterior stairs of the Seaside Motor Inn, a place on the outskirts of Briarhaven where the carpet smelled of stale cigarettes and the clientele paid in cash. It was the last place Vanessa would look for her sister, which made it the only place I could breathe. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the dust motes dance in the shaft of light cutting through the curtains. My hands were stained with gray dust from the hanging folders. We need a professional, I said, breaking the silence. Damon was standing by the window, peering through the gap in the drapes. He hadn't sat down since we arrived. We can't use anyone local. He said without turning around. Wexler and Shore have a reach that goes all the way to the state capitol. If you hire an accountant in this zip code, Vanessa will have the report on her desk before you do. I know. I said, I am not calling anyone local. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the contact list. I scrolled past the Briarhaven numbers, the family friends, the country club acquaintances, the people who had sent flowers but never asked how I was actually doing. I found the number for Lena Bryce. Lena was a forensic accountant I had met during my first year in Chicago. She was blunt, expensive, and hated corporate politics with a religious fervor. She was also the only person I knew who could look at a balance sheet and see the crime scene underneath. I dialed. Gabriella? Lena's voice was sharp, cutting through the static. I haven't heard from you since the Christmas party. Everything okay? I need you. Lena, I said, I need you to fly east. Today. There was a pause. I could hear the clicking of a keyboard in the background. I am in the middle of an audit for a tech firm that thinks creative accounting is a virtue. She said, I will pay double your rate. I said, cash, and I will cover the flight, but I need someone who isn't afraid of a fight. The typing stopped. What kind of fight? The kind where my family might try to destroy my reputation to stop me from reading a ledger. I said. Lena was silent for 3 seconds. I will be there by midnight. Text me the address. Lena arrived at the motel at 1 a.m. She pulled up in a rental car that looked too clean for the neighborhood, carrying a laptop bag and a travel mug that smelled like high-octane espresso. She was a small woman with sharp features and hair cut in a severe bob, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans that looked comfortable, but strictly utilitarian. She walked into the room, looked at the peeling wallpaper, then at Damon, and finally at the file cabinet. Nice digs, she said dryly. Who is the bodyguard? This is Damon. I said, he is a witness. Lena looked him up and down. Damon met her gaze calmly. He had cleaned up in the motel bathroom, shaving off the worst of the beard. But he still wore the clothes of a man who had lived on the street. Witness, Lena repeated. Okay. And the cabinet? My father's shadow archive. I said. Lena dropped her bag on the flimsy desk and cracked her knuckles. Right, she said. Let us see what Daddy was hiding. For the next 6 hours, the room became a war room. Lena worked with a terrifying efficiency. She pulled files, scanned pages, and typed into her laptop with a speed that blurred her fingers. Damon sat in the corner, answering her occasional questions with precise dates and figures. I sat on the bed, reading the documents that weren't purely financial. The cabinet was a graveyard of the Coleman myth. I found the corporate minutes from 1998, the year the company had supposedly made its great leap forward. According to the public record, my father had secured a massive loan from a private equity firm that saved the business, according to the minutes in my hand. The loan never existed. Instead, there was a series of capital injections from a shell company in the Caymans, and attached to the minutes was a letter. Handwritten by my father, on his personal stationery. I picked it up. The paper was brittle. To whomever bears witness. The letter began. The row arrangement was necessary. We were insolvent. The banks had closed their doors. Damon warned me that the structure was volatile, that if the SEC looked too closely, the whole foundation would crack. But Vanessa insisted. She said she could manage the optics. I looked up. Damon was watching me. He mentions you here, I said. Damon nodded. Read the next part, he said. I looked back at the letter. I have agreed to erase Damon Pierce from the company records to protect the family name. He has agreed to take the fall for the improper transfers in exchange for my promise that the Pierce assets would be held in trust, returned to him upon the stabilization of the firm. But I fear Vanessa has no intention of honoring the trust. She speaks of him not as a partner, but as a cancer she successfully cut out. I lowered the letter. Your name is Pierce, I whispered. Damon Pierce, he corrected gently. I was the chief operations counsel. I wrote the charter. I structured the initial public offering. But why Roe? I asked. Roe was my mother's maiden name, he said, when Vanessa forced me out. She didn't just fire me, Gabriella. She dismantled me. She threatened to have me indicted for the wire fraud she orchestrated if I didn't disappear. She blacklisted me with every firm on the East Coast. I couldn't get a job as a paralegal, let alone a counsel. I became toxic. I had to use Roe just to rent an apartment, to get a library card, to exist. He looked at his hands. But a man can't live on a shadow identity forever. Eventually, the money ran out. The friends stopped answering calls. And I ended up on the street, watching the building I helped design from the pavement. I felt a surge of nausea. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just business. It was an erasure of a human being. This letter, I said, holding it up, this proves you were coerced. It proves Dad knew. It proves your father was a coward, Lena said from the desk. She didn't look up from her screen. I looked at her. He knew what was happening, Lena said, tapping a key. He wrote it down so he could feel better about it, but he still let it happen. He let his daughter ruin his partner so he could keep his country club membership. The truth of her words stung, but I couldn't deny them. My father, the great man, was just a man who was afraid of losing. Lena spun her laptop around. But the history lesson isn't the smoking gun. She said, this is... I walked over to the desk. On the screen was a spreadsheet Lena had compiled from the partial ledgers in the cabinet. There is a recurring payment, Lena explained, pointing to a line item highlighted in red. It starts 5 years ago, right around the time you left for Chicago. It is listed as security consulting. Security? I asked. We have a contract with a private security firm. Not this one, Lena said. This is paid to an entity called Blue Heron Solutions. The payments are consistently $8,000 a month. That is $96,000 a year. I frowned. That is a lot for consulting. It gets better, Lena said. I ran a background check on Blue Heron. It is a single-member LLC registered in Delaware. The registered agent is a generic service, but the mailing address forwards to a post office box in Northlake. Northlake? I said. That is the next town over. Exactly, Lena said. And do you know who rents that post office box? I shook my head. I did a little cross-referencing with the employee database you gave me access to. Lena said, the box is registered to a man named Thomas Miller. The name meant nothing to me. Who is Thomas Miller? He is the husband of Sarah Miller. Lena said. I stared at her. The name clicked. Sarah Miller is Vanessa's personal assistant. I said, she has been with Vanessa for 10 years. Lena sat back in her chair, crossing her arms. So, your sister is funneling nearly $100,000 a year of company money into a shell company owned by her assistant's husband. Why? I asked. Kickbacks? Lena suggested. Hush money? Or maybe Sarah knows where the bodies are buried, and this is the rent for the graveyard. Either way, it is embezzlement. And unlike the stuff in the 98 minutes, the statute of limitations on this hasn't run out. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This wasn't ancient history. This was happening now. Vanessa wasn't just protecting the past. She was actively looting the company. We have her. I said, not yet, Damon said. I turned to him. What do you mean? This is proof. It is proof of a suspicious payment, Damon said. It is not proof of intent. Vanessa will say it was legitimate work. She will produce invoices. She will say Sarah's husband provided security assessments. Unless we have the emails, or the actual bank transfers showing the money going back to Vanessa, she can spin this. She's already spinning. I said, remembering the elevator. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was my boss, David, calling from Chicago. I hesitated. It was 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. I should have been in a strategy meeting for the spring campaign. Answer it, Damon said. I picked up the phone. Hello? David? Gabriella. David's voice was tight. He sounded uncomfortable. Look, I just got off the phone with your sister. I closed my eyes. Of course she called him. David, I started. She sounded really worried. Gab, David said. She told me you are having an episode. She said you are under a lot of stress with the funeral and that you have been behaving erratically. Erratically. I repeated. She mentioned you might be under the influence of someone. David said, some guy you met? Look, I don't want to pry, but she asked if we had noticed any instability before you left. She was asking about your health insurance, about whether our policy covers mental health inpatient care. My hand gripped the phone so hard the plastic creaked. She is trying to frame me. David, I said, my voice shaking. I am not unstable. I am investigating a fraud. David was silent. The silence stretched too long. Gab, he said finally, you know we love you here, but maybe you should take some time. Use your bereavement leave. Get some rest. Vanessa said she is trying to help you. She sounded terrified for you. She is terrified of me. David, I said, there is a difference. Just take care of yourself, okay? David said, we will talk when you get back. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. I felt dirty. Vanessa had taken the one thing I had built for myself, my professional reputation, and poisoned it with a few well-placed words of concern. It was a reputational squeeze, efficient and brutal. She wasn't attacking me. She was isolating me. She was painting a picture of a grieving, hysterical woman being manipulated by a predator, so that when I finally spoke the truth, no one would believe me. She called my boss. I said to the room. She asked if my insurance covers the psych ward. Lena looked up from her laptop. Her expression softened. Just a fraction. Classic move, she said. Discredit the witness before they take the stand. If you are crazy, then the documents are fake. The forensic accountant is a delusion, and Damon is a cult leader. It is working, I said, my voice barely a whisper. David believed her, because she is good at it. Damon said. He walked over and stood in front of me. I looked up at him. She did the same thing to me. Gabriella. She called my partners. She called the bar association. She told them I was gambling. She told them I was drinking. By the time I tried to tell my side, everyone already knew the truth. Concern is her favorite weapon because it doesn't leave bruises. I felt a sudden, hot flash of embarrassment. I had spent the last 2 days feeling noble, feeling like I was the one saving Damon. I had bought him a sandwich. I had given him a ride. I had felt a secret, shameful thrill at being the benevolent Coleman sister. But looking at him now, I realized how arrogant that was. Damon wasn't a charity case. He was a casualty of the same war I was just starting to fight. "I am sorry," I said. "For what?" "For thinking I was better than this." I said, "For thinking I was safe." "You are not safe," Damon said. "But you are not alone, and that is what she is really afraid of." My phone buzzed again. A text message. I looked at it. It wasn't David. It was Mara Klein. "Meet me at the diner on 4th. Alone, please." The diner was a chrome and neon relic that served bad coffee and worse pie. I sat in a booth in the back, watching the door. I had left Damon and Lena at the motel. Lena was digging deeper into the shell company, and Damon was drafting a list of every document we needed to find to corroborate the letter. Mara hurried in 5 minutes late. She was wearing a trench coat belted tightly at the waist, and she looked like she hadn't slept in a week. She slid into the booth opposite me, keeping her head down. "Did you tell anyone you were coming?" she asked. "No." I said, "Good." She ordered a coffee and didn't touch it when it arrived. She gripped the mug with both hands as if trying to warm them. "Gabriella, you need to know what is happening," she said, her voice a low murmur. "Vanessa filed an emergency petition this morning." "A petition for what?" "For an emergency guardianship," Mara said. "And a protective order. Guardianship?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "Over me?" "She is claiming you are being coerced," Mara said. "The petition states that you are under the undue influence of an unknown vagrant who is exploiting your grief to gain access to the estate. She has affidavits from the receptionist at the firm, and—" Mara hesitated. "And from me? You signed an affidavit saying I am crazy?" I asked, my voice rising. "Keep your voice down," Mara hissed. "I didn't say you were crazy. I confirmed that you brought a homeless man into a confidential meeting and that you appeared agitated." "I didn't have a choice, Gabriella. She is the executor. She is my client. You are a coward, Mara." I said, "I know," she said miserably. "I know I am. That is why I'm here." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded envelope. She slid it across the table. "What is this?" I asked. "The codicil," she whispered. I stared at the envelope. The one she said was invalid. "It is perfectly valid," Mara said. "I notarized it myself. Grant came to me in March. He was lucid. He was angry. He found out about the payments to Blue Heron. He didn't know the full extent, but he knew Vanessa was moving money. Why didn't he fire her?" I asked. "Because he was dying," Mara said, "and because he was afraid of the scandal. If he fired her, she would have burned the company down. She has leverage, Gabriella. She always has. So he wrote this instead," I said, tapping the envelope. "It changes the voting structure," Mara explained. "It creates a dual trustee system. For any transaction over $10,000, both sisters must sign, and it specifically mandates a forensic audit of the last 10 years of operations as a condition of inheritance. That is why she hid it." I said, "An audit would send her to jail." Mara nodded. "If this document is entered into probate, Vanessa loses her unilateral control, and the audit will expose everything. So why are you giving it to me?" I asked. "Because I can't sleep," Mara said, "and because—" She looked around the diner, terrified. "Because Vanessa told me to shred it. She told me to destroy the original. And did you?" Mara looked me in the eye. I told her I did. But I kept it in my personal safe. This is a certified copy. I took the envelope. It felt light, but I knew it carried the weight of a sledgehammer. "You have to be careful." "Gabriella," Mara said, "the hearing for the protective order is tomorrow. If the judge grants it, the police will pick up Damon. And if they pick him up—" "What?" "Vanessa has friends in the county lockup," Mara said darkly. "Bad things happen in holding cells when no one is watching. If they get him, He won't make it to trial. I felt a chill that went deeper than the bone. This wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a hit. Why are you helping me? I asked again. Mara stood up. She looked tired and small. Your father wasn't a good man, Gabriella. But he was my friend. And he told me, right before the end, he said, if Gabriella ever finds her fight, give her the ammunition. She turned and walked out of the diner before I could say another word. I drove back to the motel with the envelope on the passenger seat. My mind was racing. Tomorrow. We had until tomorrow before the legal machinery ground us into dust. When I got back to the room, Lena was on the phone, yelling at a bank clerk in the Cayman Islands. Damon was sitting on the floor, surrounded by piles of paper he had organized into a timeline. I threw the envelope onto the bed. We have the codicil, I said. Lena hung up the phone. Is it real? It is certified. I said, and it mandates an audit. That is the nail in the coffin, Lena said, grinning. But there is a problem. I said, I told them about the hearing, about the protective order, about the threat to Damon. Damon didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly, as if he had expected this. She is moving fast, he said. We need to leave. I said, we need to go to the city. We need to file this in federal court. Away from Briarhaven. We can't. Damon said, the estate is under the jurisdiction of the county probate court. You have to fight it here. If you run, the judge will grant the guardianship by default. You will be a fugitive. Then what do we do? I asked. Pacing the small room, if we walk into that courtroom tomorrow, they will arrest you. Mara said. I know what Mara said. Damon interrupted. And she is right. If I go into a cell, I don't come out. Then you stay here. I said, I will go to court. Lena will go with me. No, Damon said. He stood up. He looked at the file cabinet. Then at me. You need me there, Gabriella. You need me to testify to the authenticity of the records. You need me to identify the handwriting. Without me, Vanessa's lawyers will bury that cabinet in motions and objections for 5 years. They will claim the documents are forgeries. They will claim I planted them. But if you go, I have to go, he said. He walked over to the window and looked out at the parking lot. You asked me why I came back, he said softly. Why I didn't just keep walking. I waited, the last time I was in that conference room, 20 years ago. I signed a confession for a crime I didn't commit. Damon said, I let them take my name. I let them take my life. Because I thought I was saving the company. I thought I was being loyal. He turned to face me. I spent 10 years sleeping under bridges, Gabriella. I ate out of garbage cans. And every night, I told myself it was just bad luck. But it wasn't bad luck. It was punishment. It was punishment for being weak, for letting them win. He walked over to the bed and picked up the codicil. I am not begging anymore, he said. I am not hiding. Tomorrow. I am walking into that courtroom as Damon Pierce, and if they arrest me, let them do it in front of the judge. Let them do it on the record. He looked at me, and his eyes were clear and fierce. This isn't about the money. Gabriella, you know that, right? I nodded. I knew it. It wasn't about the $4,000 a month. It wasn't about the house. It is about the truth. I said, it is about rewriting the story. Damon said, Vanessa thinks she owns the history of this family. She thinks she can edit people out. Tomorrow. We put the ink back on the page. Lena stood up and closed her laptop. Well, she said, if we are going to court tomorrow, we need to prep. I have found 3 more shell companies linked to the assistant, and I have a question about a property transfer in 2010. We worked through the night, the motel room filled with the smell of stale coffee and the electric tension of the coming storm. We built our case, piece by piece, reconstructing the reality that Vanessa had spent a lifetime burying as the sun began to rise over the ocean, casting a gray light over Briarhaven. I looked at Damon. He was asleep in the chair, his head resting on his chest. He looked older than his years, worn down by the wind and the weight of his secrets, but he was here. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked pale, but the fear in my eyes was gone. Vanessa had called me unstable. She had called me weak. She was about to find out exactly who I was. I walked back into the room. "Wake up," I said. "It is time to go to court." The intricate woodwork of the Briarhaven County Courthouse was designed to intimidate. It was all dark oak and polished brass, smelling of floor wax and judgment. I walked into the preliminary hearing room with my heart beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs, flanking Damon on one side and Lena on the other. Vanessa was already there. She sat at the plaintiff's table, a portrait of elegant grief in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Lena's car. She was flanked by a phalanx of attorneys from a high-end city firm, men with sharp jawlines and expensive watches who looked at us like we were something they had scraped off their shoes. The judge, the Honorable Silas Halloway, was a man I remembered from my father's holiday parties. He was 70, with a face like a crumpled paper bag and eyes that had seen every lie this town had to offer. Vanessa's lead counsel, a man named Sterling who moved with the predatory grace of a shark, stood up to open. "Your Honor," he began, his voice rich and baritone, "we are here today on a matter of urgent family safety. My client, Vanessa Coleman, is the executor of the Coleman estate. She is petitioning for a protective order against the individual sitting across the aisle, known as Damon Rowe, and a temporary guardianship over her sister, Gabriella Coleman." He gestured toward me with a pitying open palm. "Ms. Coleman has returned to Briarhaven in a state of significant emotional distress following her father's death. While we sympathize with her grief, it has made her vulnerable to manipulation. She has brought a homeless drifter, a man with no fixed address and a documented history of vagrancy, into confidential legal proceedings. She claims this man is a former associate of her father, a delusion that this man has clearly fed her to gain access to the Coleman fortune." I sat rigid, my hands clenched under the table. It was a masterclass in narrative construction. In 3 sentences, he had turned me into a victim and Damon into a villain, all while sounding like he was doing us a favor. Sterling continued, "We have affidavits from the staff at Wexler and Shore describing Ms. Coleman's erratic behavior. We believe she is being coerced. We are asking the court to remove Mr. Rowe from her presence and to place her financial decisions under the oversight of the executor until a psychological evaluation can be completed." Judge Halloway looked over his spectacles at me. "Ms. Coleman, do you have representation?" I stood up. My legs felt heavy. "I am representing myself today." "Your Honor," I said. My voice shook, then steadied. "And I am not erratic. I am investigating a fraud." Sterling sighed, a sound of patient exhaustion. "Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of paranoia—" "I am not paranoid," I interrupted, my voice rising. "And this man is not a drifter named Rowe. His name is Damon Pierce." Sterling smirked. "Your Honor, we have run a background check. There is no Damon Pierce in any recent database. The man is a ghost." Damon stood up. He didn't jump up. He didn't shout. He rose slowly, smoothing the front of the cheap suit I had bought him at a discount store the night before. He looked at the judge, and for the first time, the courtroom shifted. He didn't stand like a defendant. He stood like counsel, if I may. "Your Honor," Damon said. His voice was calm, pitched perfectly for the acoustics of the room. Sterling bristled. "Your Honor, this man is not a party to the estate." "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, holding up a hand. "Let him speak." Damon nodded his thanks. "Mr. Sterling is correct that there is no recent database entry for Damon Pierce." Damon said, "That is because my bar license was voluntarily surrendered in 2002, following a compliance settlement that was sealed by this very court." He looked at Sterling. "However, if counsel checks the incorporation documents for Coleman Meridian Holdings, specifically the Articles of Organization dated June 4th, 1991, he will find my signature on page 12 as the filing attorney." The room went quiet. Sterling frowned, looking at his notes. "Furthermore," Damon continued, looking at the judge, "the protective order application cites a harassment incident on Tuesday the 24th. I would point out that under the Briarhaven Municipal Code, Section 402, simply being present in a law office waiting room does not constitute harassment unless there is a verbal threat or physical menacing. The affidavit from Ms. Klein contains neither. It merely states that Vanessa Coleman was disturbed by my presence. Being disturbing to the executor is not, to my knowledge, a felony. Judge Holloway leaned forward. He looked at Damon with a sudden, sharp interest. You seem to know your way around the municipal code. Mr. Rowe. Pierce, Your Honor, Damon corrected gently. And yes, I wrote that section of the code when I served on the town council in '96. Vanessa shifted in her seat. I saw her hand grip the edge of the table. The perfect narrative was developing a crack. A homeless man wasn't supposed to know how to cite municipal codes. I seized the moment. Your Honor, I said, stepping forward, the reason my sister wants a protective order isn't because she is afraid for my safety. She's afraid of what we found. I lifted the heavy file folder Lena had prepared. We have located a storage unit, paid for by my father, containing financial records that were deliberately removed from the company archives. We are requesting a court-supervised forensic review of these documents. Sterling was on his feet instantly. Objection. Those are personal effects, irrelevant to the probate process. They are corporate ledgers. I countered, and they show payments to shell companies controlled by Vanessa's staff. Vanessa stood up. That is a lie. The outburst was sudden and sharp. Sterling touched her arm, silencing her, but the damage was done. Judge Holloway looked between us. He looked at the disheveled man who spoke like a lawyer and the polished heiress who was losing her cool. I am granting a temporary preservation order for the contents of the storage unit, the judge ruled, banging his gavel, and I am denying the protective order against Mr. Pierce pending further evidence of actual threat. As for the guardianship, he looked at me. You seem lucid enough to me. Miss Coleman. Denied. The hallway outside the courtroom was a chaotic swirl of paralegals and onlookers. I felt a rush of adrenaline, a giddy sense of victory. We had survived. We had stopped the steamroller. Lena grabbed my elbow and pulled me into a quiet alcove near the water fountains. Damon stood guard, his back to us, watching the crowd. Don't celebrate yet, Lena said, her voice low and urgent. What is it? I asked. We got the preservation order. I found something else, she said. She opened her laptop bag and pulled out a photocopy of a document. It was a page from the corporate minutes I had seen earlier, but Lena had cross-referenced it with something else. This is from 2002. Lena said, the week Damon disappeared. I looked at the paper. It was a standard resolution revoking signature authority for Damon Pierce. Standard procedure when an officer leaves. I said, look at the date. Lena said, October 12th? Now look at this. She handed me a second document. It was an internal memo from the Risk Management Department, marked confidential. Subject, Compliance Incident 2002-Alpha. Report of unauthorized wire transfers totaling $4 million. The date on the memo was October 10th, 2 days before Damon was fired. And look who signed off on the incident report, Lena said, pointing to the bottom of the page. I looked. The signature was small, precise, and familiar. Vanessa Coleman, VP of Operations. She reported it. I said, she reported the fraud. She reported a fraud. Lena corrected. But look at the resolution. Who took over Damon's signature authority the day he left? I looked back at the first document. Authority transferred to Vanessa Coleman. She created the crisis, Lena said, her eyes hard. She reported the transfers to trigger an internal investigation, blamed Damon for them, and then used the panic to seize control of the financial operations. It was a coup. Gabriella, a corporate coup d'etat. I felt sick. It was one thing to know my sister was greedy. It was another to see the mechanics of her ambition laid out in black and white. She hadn't just drifted into corruption. She had engineered it with the cold precision of a surgeon. I need to talk to her. I said, Gabriella. Don't, Lena warned. She is dangerous. I need to hear her say it. I said, I walked away from them, down the marble corridor toward the side exit where I knew Vanessa would be waiting for her driver. She was there, standing in the shadow of a pillar. furiously typing on her phone. Her lawyers were standing by the curb, arguing with a parking attendant. "Vanessa," I said. She stopped typing. She didn't turn around immediately. She took a breath, composed her face, and then turned. "You made quite a scene in there," she said. Her voice was light, dismissive. Dad would be so embarrassed. "Stop it," I said. "Drop the act. Ness, there is no one here but us." She looked around. She saw her lawyers were out of earshot. Her shoulders slumped slightly, and the mask slipped. She looked suddenly tired, older than her 36 years. "What do you want, Gabriella? You want a gold star? You want emotion? Congratulations. I know about the transfers in 2002. I said. Vanessa went still. "I know you signed the incident report." I continued, stepping closer. "I know you used it to take Damon's authority. You framed him. You destroyed his life so you could take over the checkbook." Vanessa looked at me. Her eyes weren't angry anymore. They were flat, devoid of emotion. "You think you understand," she said softly. "You think you found a smoking gun, but you are looking at the world through a keyhole. Then open the door," I challenged. "Tell me what you did." Vanessa stepped closer to me. She smelled of Chanel and fear. "I didn't frame him for fun, Gabriella. I framed him because the company was bleeding out. Dad had made bad bets. Real estate in Florida, derivatives. We were insolvent. We were days away from payroll bouncing. 500 employees were going to lose their jobs. The pension fund was going to be wiped out." I stared at her. "What?" "Damon wanted to declare bankruptcy," she hissed. "He wanted to dissolve the firm. He said it was the ethical thing to do." She spat the word ethical like it was a curse. I couldn't let that happen. Dad built this company from nothing. I wasn't going to let a lawyer with a conscience bury his legacy, so I did what had to be done. I moved the money. I created the liquidity we needed to survive the quarter. And when the auditors started asking questions, I needed a scapegoat. "So you chose him," I whispered. "He was the only one who knew." She said, "It was him or me. It was him or the company. I chose the company. I chose us." She reached out and touched my shoulder. I pulled away. "I protected you, Gabriella," she said, her voice intense. "That trust fund that paid for your college? That paid for your apartment in Chicago? That money came from the solvency I created. You have been living on the fruits of my crime for 20 years. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. You are a monster." I said. "I am a CEO," she countered. "And if you keep digging, if you expose this, you aren't just hurting me, you are destroying the company. You are firing every single person who works for us. Is that what you want? Do you want to be the righteous sister who burns the house down to kill a spider?" She checked her watch. "I have a meeting. Grow up, Gabriella. The world isn't black and white. It is green." She turned and walked toward her waiting car, her heels clicking on the pavement like gunshots. I found Damon sitting in my rental car in the parking lot. Lena was in the back seat, typing furiously. I got in and slammed the door. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the brick wall of the courthouse. She admitted it. I said. Damon didn't look surprised. "What did she say?" "She said she did it to save the company." I said. "She said Dad was insolvent. She said you wanted to declare bankruptcy." Damon nodded slowly. "That is true." I turned to him. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it is complicated," Damon said. He looked out the window. Your father had over-leveraged. He was gambling with the employee pension fund. When the market dipped, he was underwater. I told him we had to self-report. I told him we had to restructure. It would have meant losing the family fortune, but the employees would have been protected by federal insurance. And Vanessa? Vanessa refused. Damon said, "She said the name Coleman meant more than the law. So she executed a series of kiting schemes, moving debt between shell companies to make the books look balanced. It is fraud, Gabriella, massive, systemic fraud, but it worked. The market recovered. The company survived. But you took the fall." I said, "I found out about it too late." He said, By the time I realized what she had done, the money was already moved. She came to me and said, "If you expose this, Dad goes to prison, I go to prison, the company dissolves." So she offered me a deal. I take the blame for mismanagement. I leave quietly. And she keeps the company alive. "You sacrificed yourself for my father?" I asked. "I loved him," Damon said simply. "He was my best friend. And I thought Vanessa would eventually fix it. I thought she would pay the money back. I didn't know she would turn it into a permanent business model." I slumped back in the seat. My head was spinning. Moral vertigo, that was the only way to describe it. "If we expose this," I said, looking at Lena, "if we prove the fraud, what happens to Coleman Meridian?" Lena stopped typing. "The SEC freezes the assets." She said, "The stock plummets to zero. The creditors call in the loans. The company is liquidated." "And the employees?" I asked. "The people in the warehouse? The administrative staff?" "Unemployed," Lena said. "And since the pension fund was likely used as collateral for the fraud, they probably lose their retirement too." I closed my eyes. "So Vanessa is right," I said. "If I win, everyone else loses." Damon turned to me. "That is the trap. Gabriella, that is how she has kept everyone silent for 20 years. She holds the employees hostage. She says, 'Protect my lie, or innocent people suffer.'" "So what do we do?" I asked. "Do we let her keep stealing?" "No," Damon said, "because she isn't fixing it. She is just digging the hole deeper. Eventually. The collapse will happen anyway, and it will be worse. The only way to save anything is to cut out the rot now." It sounded noble, but I wasn't the one who would have to go home to a family and say I lost my job because the owner's daughter had a conscience. I started the car. "Where are we going?" Lena asked. "Wexler and Shore." I said, "I need to talk to Mara." Mara Klein was waiting for us in the lobby. She looked like she had been crying. She ushered us into a small side office, away from the prying eyes of the receptionist. "She knows." Mara said the moment the door closed, "Vanessa knows I gave you the copy of the codicil. She called me. She threatened to have me disbarred. She can't." I said, "You were complying with a subpoena." "I don't have a subpoena," Mara cried. "I gave it to you voluntarily. That is a breach of privilege." "Mara, calm down," Damon said. His voice was steadying. "If we prove the fraud, attorney-client privilege is void. The crime-fraud exception applies." Mara looked at Damon. She looked at him with a mixture of shame and awe. "I remember you," she whispered. "You used to bring donuts on Fridays." Damon smiled. A faint, sad expression. "I like the maple bars." Mara sank into a chair. "My predecessor, Arthur Shore. He told me about you." She said to Damon, "Before he died, he told me that Vanessa Coleman was the most dangerous client we ever had. He said she would burn the whole town down before she lost an argument. That is why you sat on the codicil?" I asked. "I was afraid," Mara admitted. "But I can't do it anymore. The audit provision. Grant put that in there because he knew. He knew she was stealing, but he couldn't bring himself to stop her while he was alive. He left it to you, Gabriella. He left me a bomb," I said bitterly. "He left you a choice," Damon corrected. I looked at the three of them. Lena, the warrior, Damon, the martyr, Mara, the witness. "I need a special fiduciary." I said to Mara, "What?" "I need you to file a motion." I said, "I want the court to appoint a special fiduciary to oversee the company's finances immediately. We need to freeze discretionary transfers. We need to stop her from moving any more money to the shell companies. That is an act of war." Mara said, "We are already at war." I said, "File it." The retaliation came 3 hours later. I was back at the motel, trying to eat a slice of cold pizza. When a courier arrived, he handed me a thick envelope. It wasn't a legal motion. It was a settlement offer. I opened it. Lena looked over my shoulder. "Holy Mother," Lena whispered. The number on the page was staggering. $5 million. It was a buyout. A lump sum payment in exchange for me waiving all rights to the estate. withdrawing the request for an audit, and signing a non-disclosure agreement that was so restrictive I probably wouldn't be allowed to say the name Coleman in public ever again. Attached to the offer was a handwritten note from Vanessa. Gabriella, this is the exit ramp. Take the money, go back to Chicago, buy a condo, start your own firm, be happy. If you pursue this, I will spend every cent of the company's money on legal fees fighting you. I will drag your name through the mud until you can't get a job at a fast food restaurant. I will destroy Damon. I will destroy Mara. And when the company finally collapses, the blood of 500 families will be on your hands. Not mine. Choose wisely. V. I stared at the check. $5 million. It was freedom. It was safety. I could walk away. I could leave Damon to his fate. He was a grown man. After all, I could leave Briarhaven to rot. Why was it my responsibility to fix a broken system I had spent my whole life trying to escape? I looked at Damon. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, reading a law book he had picked up from the library. He looked up at me. That is a lot of zeros, he said. It is, I said. She is buying your silence. He said, I know. And she is buying her survival. He added. I looked at the check again. I thought about the employees. If I took the money, the company would stay afloat. Vanessa would keep juggling the books. People would keep their jobs. Was it really so wrong to let the lie continue if it kept people fed? But then I thought about the scratched-out face in the photo. I thought about Damon shivering on the courthouse steps. I thought about the way Vanessa had looked at me in the elevator. The total, terrifying absence of a soul. If I took the money, I would become her. I would be another person paid to look away. I would be part of the Roe arrangement. I picked up the offer. My hands were shaking. Not from fear this time, but from a terrifying realization of what I was about to do. I ripped the paper in half. Then I ripped it again. Gabriella, Lena said warningly, you realize what this means? If we lose, you get nothing. You will be bankrupt. I know. I said. I dropped the pieces into the trash can. I am not taking the exit ramp. I said. Damon watched me. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just nodded. A slow, grave acknowledgement of the weight I had just picked up. That night, I couldn't sleep. The motel room was dark. Lena was snoring softly on the rollaway cot. Damon was asleep in the chair again. I lay awake, staring at the water stain on the ceiling. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a cold, gnawing terror. I had refused $5 million. I had declared total war on my own sister. I had put hundreds of jobs at risk. Was it principle, or was it pride? I thought of my father's letter. If you are reading this, I have failed. I rolled over, pulling the thin blanket up to my chin. I felt small. I felt incredibly young. I had chosen the truth. But as the wind howled outside, shaking the flimsy window pane, I realized I had no idea if I could survive it. The second meeting was not held in the comfortable, carpeted quiet of the family conference room. It was convened in the stark, glass-walled boardroom of Wexler and Shore. A space designed for hostile takeovers and high-stakes depositions. The air conditioner was humming a low, aggressive drone, and the table was no longer a place for coffee and condolences. It was a battlefield. Judge Holloway had granted my motion for a special fiduciary, or at least, a preliminary version of it. He had ordered a controlled review of the disputed documents in the presence of a court-appointed special master. This wasn't just a family reading a will anymore. It was an evidentiary hearing with better furniture. I arrived 15 minutes early, flanked by Lena and Damon. We had spent the last of my savings on a suit for Damon. It was charcoal gray, wool, and tailored to fit him properly. He had shaved the last of the stubble, leaving his face clean and exposed, without the beard. The years of living on the street were more visible, not less. His skin was weathered, etched with deep lines around his eyes and mouth, and he had the thin, hollowed-out look of a man who hadn't eaten a full meal in a decade. But when he walked, he didn't shuffle. He strode. He carried a leather briefcase, empty, except for a notepad and a pen, but he held it like it contained nuclear codes. Vanessa arrived at the stroke of 10. She didn't come alone. Following her was a man I didn't recognize, but whose type I knew instantly from my years in marketing. He was tall, wearing a suit that was too blue and a smile that was too white. He carried 2 phones and a tablet, and his eyes scanned the room not for threats, but for angles. "This is Marcus Thorne," Vanessa said. By way of introduction, she didn't look at me. She looked at the special master, a retired judge named Arthur Sterling, who sat at the head of the table. "Mr. Thorne is a consultant from Northlake Strategy Group. He is here to assist with the communications aspect of the estate transition." I looked at Lena. She raised an eyebrow. Northlake Strategy Group wasn't a PR firm. It was a crisis management unit. They were the people you called when your oil tanker spilled into a protected reef or your CEO was caught embezzling. Vanessa wasn't treating this like a legal dispute. She was treating it like a political campaign. She was preparing to manage the narrative before the truth even hit the record. Mr. Thorne sat next to Vanessa, placing his phones on the table face up. He opened a notebook and uncapped a pen, his movements precise and predatory. He looked at me, then at Damon, his eyes lingering on Damon's suit for a fraction of a second too long. He was assessing the optics. Ragged sister, reformed beggar, angry accountant. I could see him writing the headlines in his head. Then Vanessa looked at Damon. It was a small moment. If you weren't watching her closely, you would have missed it. She was arranging her papers, projecting an air of bored competence. But when her eyes landed on Damon, cleaned up, suited, sitting across from her not as a vagrant but as an equal, her hand froze on the file folder. Her pupils contracted, her breath hitched, a tiny, sharp intake of air. It wasn't the sheer terror I had seen in the hallway 2 days ago. It was something colder. It was the realization that the ghost she thought she had exorcised was not only back, but he had armor. Damon met her gaze. He didn't smile. He just nodded. Once. "Hello?" "Vanessa," he said. Vanessa didn't answer. She looked away, her jaw tightening so hard I could see the muscle feather under her skin. She turned to the special master. "Can we proceed?" she asked. Her voice was brittle. "I have a company to run." Arthur Sterling cleared his throat. He was a man who had seen everything in his 40 years on the bench, and he seemed unimpressed by Vanessa's urgency. "We are here to review the supplemental testamentary document known as the Codicil of March 14th, Sterling said, "and to address the allegations of financial impropriety raised by Ms. Gabriella Coleman." He put on his reading glasses and opened the file in front of him. "Let us begin with the codicil." Mara Klein was sitting at the far end of the table. She looked pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had risked her career to give me this document. If we lost today, she would be disbarred before sunset. Sterling lifted the document. "This instrument, dated March 14th of this year, appears to modify the governance structure of the Coleman Family Trust and the voting rights associated with Coleman Meridian Holdings." Sterling said. He read the key provisions aloud. The language was dry, but the impact was seismic. Article 4, Section B. "In the event of my death, the authority of the executor shall be limited regarding the disposition of core assets. Any sale, transfer, or leveraging of assets exceeding $10,000 in value shall require the dual signature of both Vanessa Coleman and Gabriella Coleman." Vanessa didn't flinch. She stared straight ahead at the wall. Sterling continued. Article 4, Section C. "Prior to the final distribution of the estate, the beneficiary Gabriella Coleman must be granted full, unsupervised access to the archived records known as the Pierce file. This condition is absolute. No distribution shall occur until Gabriella Coleman certifies in writing that she has reviewed these records." The room went dead silent. The Pierce file. My father hadn't just left me money. He had left me a map. By naming the file, he had acknowledged Damon's existence. He had acknowledged the history Vanessa had tried to erase. It was a message from the grave, explicitly designed to force the one thing Vanessa couldn't survive: the truth. Vanessa spoke without turning her head. "It is a forgery." Sterling looked over his glasses. "Ms. Coleman?" "It is a forgery," Vanessa repeated. She turned to look at the special master, her face composed into a mask of righteous indignation. My father never wrote that. He hasn't used the name Pierce in 20 years. This document was fabricated by the man sitting across from me, who has a history of fraud and deception. She pointed a manicured finger at Damon. He is a con artist, Vanessa said, her voice gaining strength. He manipulated my sister into printing this fantasy. Look at the signature. It is shaky. It was clearly traced. I looked at the signature on the copy in front of me. It was shaky, but it wasn't traced. It was the signature of a dying man who was terrified of his own daughter. It is not a forgery. I said, Mara notarized it. Mara was coerced. Vanessa snapped. Or she is complicit. I will be filing a complaint with the Bar Association against her by end of business today. Marcus Thorne, the PR consultant, made a note in his notebook. Discredit the lawyer. I thought, check. Damon leaned forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. I witnessed it. He said. Vanessa laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. Of course you did. You wrote it. I didn't write it, Damon said calmly. Grant wrote it. He wrote it at his kitchen table at 3 a.m, while you were in New York meeting with the bond rating agencies. He called me. He called you? Vanessa scoffed. He didn't even know you were alive. You were sleeping under a bridge. He knew where I was. Damon said. He sent a car. Damon looked at the special master. Your Honor, he said, using the old honorific out of habit. Grant Coleman was dying. He knew he didn't have much time. He knew that if he tried to fire Vanessa, she would destroy the company before he was in the ground. He told me he wanted to leave a fail-safe, a mechanism that would force the truth out without destroying the business immediately. Damon tapped the table with his index finger. He asked me to come to the house. I went in through the service entrance. He was weak. He could barely hold the pen. But he wrote this. He asked me to witness it because he said I was the only person who knew what the Pierce file actually meant. He looked at Vanessa. He gave me the original. Vanessa. He told me to keep it safe. He said, don't let her find this until Gabriella is ready. And where is this original? Vanessa demanded. If you are the custodian, produce it. It was stolen, Damon said. Vanessa threw up her hands. How convenient. The dog ate your homework. It was stolen from my backpack 2 days after the funeral, Damon said, his voice dropping to a low, intense register. While I was sleeping at the shelter, someone paid a junkie $50 to slash my bag and take the envelope. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. I wonder who would pay for that. Vanessa? Vanessa rolled her eyes. This is absurd. We are listening to the conspiracy theories of a homeless man. I realized then what had actually happened. The beggar on the courthouse steps. He hadn't been waiting for a handout. He had been waiting for me. He had lost the document. The one thing that could prove his story and save my father's conscience. He had been staking out the courthouse because he knew I had to show up eventually. He needed to get into this room. He needed to be the living witness because the paper witness was gone. He wasn't trying to win money. He was trying to detonate the bomb my father had built. I have a certified copy. Mara spoke up. Her voice was shaking, but audible. I made a copy before Grant gave the original to Mr. Pierce. It is in the vault. Vanessa turned on her. You are fired. Mara, you can't fire a witness. Sterling cut in. His voice was sharp. Ms. Coleman, you will refrain from threatening the officers of the court. Sterling looked at the document again. The existence of a certified copy from the drafting attorney carries significant weight. Sterling said, however, given the allegations of forgery, we need more than just testimony. We need corroboration of the underlying claims. This Pierce file, does it exist? I stood up. Yes, I said, it exists. I nodded to Lena. Lena opened her laptop and connected it to the large screen at the end of the room. Vanessa flinched as the screen flickered to life. Marcus Thorne stopped writing and looked up, his eyes narrowing. We didn't find the Pierce file in the company archives, Lena said, because it was removed, but we found the trail it left behind. Lena clicked a key. A spreadsheet appeared on the screen. It was a complex web of transactions, lines connecting boxes labeled with names of shell companies. These are the accounts payable records for Coleman Meridian for the last 5 years. Lena explained. She pointed to a red line. This entity, Blue Heron Solutions, has received $96,000 a year for security consulting. Vanessa sighed. We discussed this. We have security threats. We are a high-profile family. Lena clicked another key. We did a deep dive on Blue Heron. Lena said, we subpoenaed the bank records of the receiving account. Vanessa went still. Subpoenas took time. She hadn't expected us to move this fast. She didn't know Lena Bryce. The money doesn't go to security consultants. Lena said, it goes into an account held by Thomas Miller. Lena paused for effect. Who is the husband of your personal assistant? Sarah Miller. The room was silent. Marcus Thorne leaned over and whispered something in Vanessa's ear. Vanessa shook her head. A sharp, angry motion. And from there, Lena continued, clicking again. 70% of the funds are transferred within 24 hours to a Cayman Islands account held by a trust. Lena looked at Vanessa. The VC Revocable Trust. Lena zoomed in on the screen. It is simple embezzlement. Ms. Coleman, you are siphoning company funds to pay for what? Lifestyle? Or perhaps to pay off the people who know about the other fraud? Vanessa stood up. She moved slowly, deliberately. She smoothed her skirt. This is a gross misinterpretation of standard executive discretionary spending, she said calmly. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the razor-thin edge to it. The Blue Heron payments are for confidential personnel management. Sarah handles sensitive issues for the family. The transfers to the trust are reimbursements for personal capital. I loaned the company years ago. Reimbursements don't go through a shell company owned by your assistant's husband. Lena shot back. That is money laundering. It is privacy. Vanessa snapped. Arthur Sterling held up a hand. Ms. Coleman, Sterling said, his voice grave. These are serious discrepancies. If these transfers are not authorized by the board— I am the board, Vanessa shouted. She slammed her hand on the table. The veneer of the grieving daughter finally cracked, revealing the tyrant underneath. I am the majority shareholder. I am the CEO. I decide how the money moves. Dad was too weak to do what needed to be done. He didn't have the stomach for the real world. I saved this company. She looked at me, her eyes blazing with a terrifying intensity. You think you are so righteous. Gabriella, you with your little apartment and your marketing job? You have no idea what it costs to keep this family on top. You think the lights stay on because of goodwill? They stay on because I make the hard calls. I move the money where it needs to be. I pay the people who need to be paid. She gestured at Damon. And yes, I cut out the cancer. Because he wanted to destroy us. He wanted to confess to the SEC. He would have sunk the ship just to clear his own conscience. Damon looked at her. I wanted to follow the law. Vanessa, the law doesn't care about 500 employees. Vanessa screamed. The law doesn't care about our legacy. I care. She stopped. Her chest was heaving. The silence in the room was absolute. Even Marcus Thorne looked stunned. He had come here to manage a PR crisis. And his client had just confessed to motive in front of a court-appointed official. Sterling took off his glasses. He looked at Vanessa with a mixture of pity and professional obligation. Ms. Coleman, he said quietly, did you just admit to manipulating the company's financial records to avoid regulatory scrutiny? Vanessa blinked. She seemed to realize. Suddenly, where she was, she looked at the special master, then she looked at Marcus Thorne. Thorne closed his notebook and put his pen in his pocket. He leaned back in his chair. Crossing his arms, he was done. There was no spinning this. I admitted to saving the company, Vanessa said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Mara Klein stood up. She was trembling, but she held a piece of paper in her hand. I have one more thing. Your Honor, Mara said. She walked to the head of the table and placed the paper in front of Sterling. This is a memo from the firm's internal archives, Mara said. It was written by Arthur Shore 2 weeks before he died. Sterling picked it up. "Read it," Mara said. Sterling read aloud. "Memo to file. Date, August 4th. Subject, Vanessa Coleman. I have been contacted by Ms. Coleman regarding the potential pre-approval of certain documents related to her father's estate. She specifically requested that I sequester any files related to the Pierce matter and asked if there were legal mechanisms to suppress a codicil before it is entered into probate. I have advised her that this would constitute obstruction of justice. She indicated that she would handle it herself." I looked at Vanessa. Premeditation. She hadn't just reacted to the will. She had been planning the cover-up while our father was still alive. Vanessa stared at the memo. She didn't deny it. She didn't scream. She just went cold. Sterling placed the memo down. He looked at the court reporter who was typing furiously in the corner. "Let the record show," Sterling said, his voice formal and heavy, "that in light of the testimony regarding the codicil, the forensic evidence of undisclosed related party transactions, and the admission of the executor regarding financial manipulation, I am issuing an immediate recommendation to the probate judge." He looked at Vanessa. "I am ordering a full, independent forensic accounting of Coleman Meridian Holdings, dating back to 2002. I am placing all estate assets under a temporary freeze. No funds are to be transferred, no assets sold, and no documents destroyed." He turned to me. "Ms. Gabriella Coleman, you are hereby granted temporary access to all company records, as per the conditions of the codicil, pending the final ruling of the court." He banged his gavel on the glass table. It made a sharp, cracking sound. "This meeting is adjourned." Vanessa stood up. She didn't look at Sterling. She didn't look at Damon. She looked at me. Her face was perfectly composed again. The rage was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. A total, icy resolve. She picked up her bag. She waited for Marcus Thorne to stand up, though he looked like he wanted to vanish into the drywall. She walked around the table until she was standing right in front of me. She was close enough that I could smell the mint on her breath. She leaned in. "You think you won?" she whispered. Her voice was razor thin, like a paper cut. "You have no idea what you just started, Gabriella." She pulled back, looking at me with eyes that were dead and flat. "You wanted the truth?" she said. "Now you have to live with it. And when the employees are marching outside your house because they lost their pensions, and when the town turns on you because you destroyed the only economy they have, don't come crying to me." I met her gaze. My heart was pounding. But I didn't step back. "I won't," I said. Vanessa smiled. A small, cold smile. "We will see." She turned and walked out of the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Marcus Thorne followed her, typing rapidly on his phone, already trying to get ahead of the story that was about to break. The door closed behind them. The room was quiet. The hum of the air conditioner seemed louder now. I looked at Damon. He was slumped in his chair, looking exhausted. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving him gray and shaking. "We did it," Lena whispered. She sounded stunned. "We actually froze the assets." Damon looked at me. He didn't look triumphant. He looked sad. "She is right. You know," he said softly. "About what?" I asked. "About what comes next," he said. He gestured to the window, where the skyline of Briarhaven was visible. The warehouses, the docks, the row houses of the people who worked for Coleman Meridian. "We just pulled the pin on the grenade," Damon said. "Now we have to wait for the explosion." I looked out the window. The town looked peaceful in the morning light. But I knew Damon was right. We had stopped Vanessa, but we hadn't saved the company. We had just exposed the rot that was holding it up. I looked at the stack of documents on the table. The Pierce file, the evidence. "I am ready," I lied. But as I watched the first news van pull up to the curb downstairs, I knew the real fight hadn't even started yet. The fallout was immediate and nuclear. In the 48 hours following the special master's order to freeze the assets, Briarhaven transformed from a sleepy coastal town into a siege zone. The local newspaper, the Briarhaven Gazette, ran a headline in bold, black type that looked like a declaration of war. Coleman Empire, frozen. Payroll in limbo. News vans from the city camped out on the lawn of the Wexler and Shore offices. Their satellite dishes pointed like artillery at the brick facade. My phone didn't stop ringing. It was a cacophony of angry stakeholders, confused vendors, and terrified employees. The narrative that Vanessa had planted, that I was the unstable, grieving daughter destroying the family legacy, had taken root in the fertile soil of the town's anxiety. I couldn't go to the coffee shop anymore. When I walked down Main Street, people turned away. I saw the whispers in the reflection of shop windows. There she is, the one who shut down the mill, the one who is taking food out of our kids' mouths. It was a suffocating, physical weight. I had wanted the truth, but I hadn't calculated the collateral damage. I had stopped the embezzlement, but in doing so, I had stopped the heart of the town. We retreated to the motel, which had become our bunker. Lena was fielding calls from federal regulators who had caught the scent of blood in the water. Damon was sitting by the window, watching the rain streak the glass, his face gray and drawn. Then came the call I didn't expect. It wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't a reporter. It was the landline in the motel room. I picked it up. Gabriella. Vanessa's voice was clear, stripped of the hysteria I had seen in the boardroom. Meet me at the house. I am not meeting you alone. I said, please, she said. No lawyers, no consultants, just us. Mom's garden. 1 hour. There was something in her tone, a quiet, exhausted resignation, that made me pause. It wasn't the voice of the CEO. It was the voice of the sister who used to braid my hair before everything went wrong. 1 hour, I said. The Coleman estate sat on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, a sprawling mansion of gray stone and slate that looked like it had grown out of the rock itself. I drove my rental car up the winding driveway, past the manicured hedges and the iron gates that were currently closed to the press. Vanessa was waiting for me in the garden, a walled enclosure of roses and hydrangeas that our mother had planted before she died. The flowers were dead now, brown and withered from the frost, but the structure remained, a skeletal reminder of beauty that used to be there. Vanessa was sitting on a stone bench, wrapped in a cashmere shawl. She looked small against the backdrop of the gray ocean. You came, she said, not looking up. I stood a few feet away, keeping the stone fountain between us. What do you want, Vanessa? She looked at me. Her face was pale, devoid of makeup. The armor was gone. I want to stop the bleeding, she said. You can stop it. I said, confess. Step down. Let the forensic accountants do their job. And then what? She asked softly. The company dissolves. The assets are sold for pennies on the dollar. The employees lose their pensions. Is that victory? Gabriella? Is that what you came home for? To burn it all down? I came home to bury Dad. I said, you are the one who turned it into a war. I turned it into a survival strategy, she corrected. She patted the empty space on the bench next to her. Sit down, please. I hesitated, then sat. The stone was cold through my coat. She looked out at the ocean. I am tired. Gabriella, she whispered, I have been carrying this family on my back for 20 years. I have been the bad guy because someone had to be. Dad couldn't do it. He was too soft. He wanted everyone to like him. So I let him be the saint, and I became the sinner. I made the hard calls. I moved the money. I kept the lights on. She turned to me, her eyes searching mine. I can't do it alone anymore. And clearly, you have a talent for this. You found the cracks. You found the bodies. You are smarter than I gave you credit for. What are you saying? I asked. I am offering you a partnership. She said. I stared at her. A real partnership. She continued, her voice gaining a seductive, rhythmic cadence. We settle this today. We go to the judge together. We present a united front. We tell him it was a misunderstanding, a discrepancy in the filing. We agree to a remediation plan. We pay a fine. We keep the company alive. And Damon? I asked. We pay him, she said. We give him enough money to disappear to an island where no one knows his name. We bury the past, Gabriella. We bury Damon. And then, we run this place together. Co-CEOs. You handle the marketing, the public face, the good work. I handle the operations. We can be formidable. We can be the Coleman sisters. I looked at her. It was a beautiful picture. It was everything I had ever wanted when I was a child. To be her equal. To be respected. To belong. It offered certainty. It offered stability. It offered an end to the stares in town and the guilt of destroying livelihoods. All I had to do was agree that the lie was necessary. All I had to do was accept that Damon was an acceptable casualty for the greater good. Think about it. Vanessa pressed, sensing my hesitation. You don't want to be the villain, Gabriella. You are not built for it. You want to be loved. You can save the town. You can save the legacy. Just take my hand. She reached out her hand. Her fingers were slender, trembling slightly. I looked at her hand. It was the hand that had signed the incident report framing Damon. It was the hand that had moved millions of dollars through shell companies, but it was also my sister's hand. I felt the pull of it, the gravity of family, the desperate desire to just make the noise stop. It would be so easy. Just say yes. Just let Damon go. He was old. He was sick. Why did he matter more than the 500 families in Briarhaven? I almost took her hand. My fingers twitched. Then I heard Damon's voice in my head. Grant didn't build the engine. He just painted the car. If I took her hand, I would be painting over the rust. I would be becoming the thing I hated. I would be admitting that the truth was a luxury we couldn't afford. I pulled my hand back. I can't, I whispered. Vanessa's face hardened. The vulnerability evaporated, replaced by the cold, sharp geometry of her rage. Why? She demanded. Because of him? Because of a beggar? Because of me? I said, standing up. Because I have to live with myself. Vanessa. And I can't live in a house built on a grave. Vanessa stood up too. She pulled the shawl tighter around herself. Then you will die in the cold, she said, and I will make sure everyone knows you chose a stranger over your own blood. She turned and walked back toward the house, leaving me alone in the dead garden. I returned to the motel feeling hollowed out. I told Damon and Lena about the meeting. I told them about the offer. You should have taken it, Lena said, not looking up from her laptop. Economically speaking, it was the smart play. I know, I said. Damon was silent. He was polishing his shoes. A repetitive, soothing motion. Grant wanted to confess. He said suddenly. I looked at him. Years ago. Damon said, before the cancer. He called me. He found me at a shelter in Newark. He said the guilt was eating him alive. He said he looked at Vanessa and saw a monster he had created. He wanted to go to the FBI. He wanted to turn himself in. Why didn't he? I asked. Because he was afraid. Damon said, he was afraid of destroying what he built. He was afraid of being remembered as a failure. So he wrote the codicil instead. It was his compromise. He thought if he gave the power to you, you would find a way to fix it without the explosion. He wanted the truth, but he didn't want the consequences. He left me a grenade with the pin pulled halfway out. I said bitterly, he left you the choice he was too weak to make. Damon said, and today, you made it. He stood up. He walked over to the window, but Vanessa is right about one thing. Gabriella, you can't save everyone. Tomorrow, when I take the stand, I am going to hurt people. I am going to hurt the people who work at the mill. I am going to hurt the people who trusted the name Coleman. He turned to me. Are you ready for that? I thought of the garden. I thought of the easy silence I had rejected. No, I said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. The final hearing was a spectacle. The courtroom was packed to capacity. Reporters were sitting on the floor in the aisles. The air was thick with the smell of damp wool and nervous sweat. Judge Holloway sat on the bench, his face grim. This was not a motion hearing. This was an evidentiary showdown. The special master had requested testimony to determine the provenance of the documents in the storage unit before ruling on the permanent asset freeze. Vanessa sat at her table, flanked by Marcus Thorne and her team of lawyers. She looked impeccable, a statue of ice. I sat with Lena. Damon sat in the witness box. He looked small in the wooden chair. The microphone was positioned in front of him. "State your name for the record," the clerk said. Damon took a breath. He looked at Vanessa. "Damon Pierce," he said. A ripple of murmuring went through the room. "Mr. Pierce?" I stood up. I was representing myself again. I didn't have the money for a litigator. And frankly, I didn't trust anyone else to ask the questions. "Mr. Pierce, can you identify the documents labeled Exhibit A?" "I can," Damon said. His voice was steady, though I could see his hands trembling slightly on his knees. "They are the original incorporation ledgers of Coleman Meridian Holdings. And who prepared these ledgers?" "I did," he said, "in 1991. Vanessa's lawyer." Sterling stood up. "Objection. The witness has not established credentials. We have no proof he is who he says he is." Damon reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, battered object. "Your Honor," he said, "this is my New York State Bar Association identification card, issued 1990. It has been expired for 20 years, but the photo is me, and the fingerprint on the back is mine." The bailiff took the card and handed it to the judge. Holloway looked at it, then at Damon. Objection overruled. Holloway said, "Continue." I walked closer to the witness stand. "Mr. Pierce, why were these documents in a storage unit instead of the company archive?" "Because they contain evidence of a crime." Damon said, "What crime?" "In 2002. During the liquidity crisis, the company was insolvent," Damon explained. "The vice president of operations, Vanessa Coleman, executed a series of wire transfers involving offshore shell entities to inflate the company's perceived assets. These transfers were fraudulent. They were designed to deceive lenders and regulators. And what happened when you discovered this?" "I confronted her." Damon said. He looked directly at Vanessa. "I told her we had to self-report. She told me that if I did, she would frame me for the embezzlement. She said she had already prepared the paperwork to make it look like I was the architect of the scheme." The room was deadly quiet. "And did she?" I asked. "Yes," Damon said. "She filed a false compliance report. She stripped me of my credentials. She told me to leave town or go to prison. I left. I spent 20 years in exile because I was afraid of her." Sterling was on his feet again. "Your Honor, this is hearsay. This is a fairy tale concocted by a disgruntled former employee. It is not hearsay." Damon's voice rang out, sudden and sharp. He leaned into the microphone. "It is the truth, and the proof is in the ledger on page 42, where she signed the authorization for the transfer to the Blue Heron account." Vanessa stood up. "He is lying," she shouted. The judge banged his gavel. "Ms. Coleman, sit down." "He is lying," Vanessa screamed, her voice cracking. She wasn't the Ice Queen anymore. She was a cornered animal. She pointed at Damon. He didn't care about the company. He wanted to quit. He wanted to give up. I did what had to be done. The room froze. Vanessa stood there, her chest heaving, her fingers still pointed. She looked around the room, realizing what she had just said. I did what had to be done. It wasn't a denial. It was a justification. Sterling closed his eyes. Marcus Thorne put his head in his hands. Judge Holloway looked at Vanessa. "Ms. Coleman," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Are you admitting to the authorization of the transfers?" Vanessa looked at the judge. She looked at me. She saw the faces of the reporters, the scribbling of pens, the judgment of the town she had ruled for 2 decades. She straightened her jacket. She lifted her chin. "I am admitting that I saved this family," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I am admitting that while my father was weeping in his study, and while this man was quoting ethics textbooks, I was making sure the checks cleared. I protected the employees. I protected the town. And if that is a crime, then yes, I am guilty of survival." She sat down. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and final. Judge Holloway looked at the special master. In light of the admission by the executor, the judge said, I am ordering a formal criminal investigation into the financial conduct of Coleman Meridian Holdings. I am appointing the special master as permanent receiver for the company. Vanessa Coleman is hereby removed as executor, effective immediately. He looked at the bailiff. I am also ordering Ms. Coleman to surrender her passport pending the outcome of the investigation. He banged the gavel. Court is adjourned. Vanessa wasn't led away in cuffs. Not yet. White-collar crime takes time to process. But as she walked out of the courtroom, surrounded by her lawyers, she looked smaller. The aura of invincibility was gone. She walked past me without looking at me. She walked past the reporters who were shouting questions. She walked out into the rain, a queen in exile. I stood by the table, gathering my papers. I felt numb. We had won. We had done the impossible. But I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a demolition expert standing in the rubble. Damon walked over to me. He looked exhausted. His skin was pale, clammy. "It is done," he said softly. "We did it," I said. We walked out of the courthouse together. The rain had turned into a downpour. The reporters swarmed us, microphones thrust in our faces. "Ms. Coleman, is it true the company is bankrupt? Mr. Pierce, are you planning to sue for wrongful termination? Gabriella, how does it feel to take down your own sister?" I ignored them. I pushed through the crowd. Shielding Damon, we made it to the sidewalk. Damon stopped. He leaned against a lamppost, gasping for air. "Damon?" I asked, grabbing his arm. He waved me off. "Just need a minute." I looked at his hand. He was gripping the lamppost, but his hand was shaking violently. It wasn't just nerves. It was a rhythmic, uncontrollable tremor. I looked at his face. His eyes were unfocused. "Damon," I said, panic rising in my chest. "What is wrong?" He looked at me. He smiled, a weak, fleeting expression. "I didn't want to tell you," he whispered, "before the end." "Tell me what?" "Parkinson's," he said, "diagnosed 3 years ago at the free clinic. That is why I came back." "Gabriella." I didn't have much time left. I wanted to set the record straight before the dark took me. I stared at him. The tremor. The shuffling walk I had attributed to age. The urgency. "You are sick," I said. "I am dying," he corrected gently. Slowly. But today, I felt alive. He coughed. A wet, rattling sound. He slumped against me. I held him up, feeling the frailty of his frame under the expensive suit. "We need to get you to a doctor." I said. "No," he said. "Just take me to the ocean. I want to see the water." I put him in the car. Lena drove. I sat in the back with him, holding his shaking hand. We parked by the pier. The rain was lashing against the windshield. The ocean was a churning gray chaos. Damon watched it. He seemed peaceful. We rewrote the story. "Gabriella," he whispered. We put the ink back on the page. "Yes," I said, tears streaming down my face. "We did." He closed his eyes. "I am tired now." He drifted into sleep, his breathing shallow. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. I pulled it out, annoyed. It wasn't a reporter. It was a text message from an unknown number, blocked ID. I opened it. The message was short. It chilled the blood in my veins, freezing the tears on my cheeks. "Congratulations on the win. You fought hard, but if you keep digging, check the Pierce file for the name you think is yours. Grant wasn't the only one with secrets. Who do you think you really are?" I stared at the screen. "The name you think is yours." I looked at Damon, sleeping beside me. I looked at his face, the brow, the chin, the shape of his nose. "You have his chin," Damon had said to me on the courthouse steps. He had said I looked like Grant. But looking at him now, in the gray light of the storm, I saw something else. I saw an echo of my own face in the weary lines of his. "Who do you think you really are?" The victory dissolved. The certainty I had fought for crumbled into dust. The legal battle was over. But the mystery of my own existence had just begun. I looked out at the ocean. The the gray water stretching endlessly into the dark, and realized that in Briarhaven, the truth is never a solid bottom, it is just another layer of the abyss, and I had just jumped in. Thank you so much for listening to My Sister Froze at Inheritance Meeting When She Saw Me with a Beggar. He Turned Out to Be. I hope you enjoyed this journey through the secrets of the Coleman family. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please leave a comment below and tell me which city or country you are in. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Revenge Stories channel so you don't miss the next episode. And I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Gabriella made the right choice? And what do you think the text message means? Who is Gabriella really? Share your theories in the comments in English. Until next time.